Good evening. We will go ahead and get started. Can you all hear me? Okay. I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, June 15th, 2021 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Jenkins, can you please take the roll?
Ms. Bradley,
Here.
Mr. Barron,
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Cody, Ms. Della Gardell, Ms. Martorano,
Here.
Ms. Sawyer.
Here.
The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Martorano, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Martorano. Ms. Jenkins, could you please take the vote?
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 5-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our meeting on Tuesday, June 1st, 2021. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval. Sawyer,
Martorano,
second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Sawyer. Ms. Jenkins, could you please take the vote?
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 5-0. Next on the agenda is public forum. We provide speakers at the forum an opportunity to address the board for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the board agenda. If anyone wishes to speak during this forum, please email aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Speakers will be called individually, and we ask that they please state their name and address prior to providing comments. Guests of the board are encouraged to speak to matters relating to the program, services, and operations of DMPS. Please remember that Iowa law prohibits us from discussing specific employees or their job performance. Please avoid references to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments do not contribute to the purpose for which this public forum exists. Thank you for your support of our school district. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, this public forum is not a time for board engagement and discussion, it is our obligation to discuss only matters posted in the public agenda for the sake of transparency and opportunity afforded to all community stakeholders. Matters requiring attention will receive appropriate staff and/or board follow-up at a time after the meeting. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do. Brandon Oliver,
Hi, my name is Brandon Oliver. I live at 3021 Southwest 29th Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50321. I was recently challenged by a white colleague to focus on the progress of anti-racism in our district by speaking to the positive changes when they occur. I was given the challenge at the end of a conversation when I was told a recent Black applicant for an administrative role was turned down because they supposedly said the words, quote, "I'm not racist and I'm not biased," end quote. I was also told of a white former administrator being given an off-the-record heads up for an administrative opening, while district leaders pushed the narrative that people of color just aren't applying. We also discussed how a current white administrator, who predictably is problematic in their thinking, still, to my knowledge, goes without intervention even after they said the words, quote, "I cannot learn from reading a book," end quote, when we know they are responsible for a board goal focused on reading. I do not say this as a commentary on any individuals. It is a commentary on the double standard we hold as a district. We keep accountability and expectations low for white administrators, while we made the expectations impossible for a Black applicant to receive an administrative role. This is not an opinion, and it doesn't surprise me. From what I've heard, I've received pushback on my comments only by people who are white or white passing. I am still encouraged by a variety of people to continue speaking up, even when it causes discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress. I know there are a few of you working tirelessly for systemic change. You don't do it for approval, you admit when you're wrong, and you don't stay silent when injustice speaks. You inspire me. I'm with you and I support you. Please continue to hold us all accountable. Now, I've heard there's recently been rearranging in administration. I've learned that a shuffled deck of cards can still play the same game. Last summer, we found we are not anti-racist in our hiring and retention practices. 1 year later, the same people who admitted in the town halls to being part of the problem continue to perpetuate the same systemic problems while they still hold the same power. If we expect what we're doing to create change, then Albert Einstein would call our approach insane because we're still playing the same game. I look forward to the day I can be more positive. I will continue to shed light on truth, no matter how it makes us feel.
30
Thank
seconds.
you for your time.
Thank you. We have no other speakers at this time.
I'd like to thank our speakers for their input this evening in our public forum. The next item on our agenda is C1, third grade reading monitoring report. Dr. Ahart, this is where we normally start our monitoring discussion. Before you introduce anything, would it be okay if I let the community know a little bit about progress monitoring and what we do and what they'll maybe see and hear during this conversation?
Of course.
All right, thank you. Just for the community to know that we are going to be looking at 2 progress monitoring reports tonight. One of them is going to be third grade reading monitoring report, and then we're also going to be looking at third grade Black males monitoring report. These are both in the areas of literacy. Just as a reminder for those listening in, as we are talking about progress monitoring and what it is, it provides school boards the opportunity to evaluate the alignment between the community's visions, goals towards student outcomes, and the school district's reality, current student performance growth. While student outcome goals and current student performance may not match perfectly, it only becomes problematic when there is no evidence of student growth and progress. And even if students are yet growing and making progress, there's only catastrophic if the superintendent does not sufficiently aggressive strategies in place for increasing growth and helping students make progress. What you'll be listening to this evening is us having a conversation with the superintendent and his teams. Here at the board, we'll be asking some questions about understanding the reality that our students are having right now in the areas of third grade literacy for our Black males and for our third grade reading monitoring report. We are asking questions, as you may hear, that is helping us gain a better understanding of what is going on in our district, but also giving our superintendent the opportunity to provide the strategies that will be put in place to allow us to meet our goals, which are in place. So I just wanted to provide the community a little bit about what we will talk about this evening. Also, board, as we're going through this, we're going to be asking some questions of our superintendent. Those questions may be answered by him. Those might be answered also by people on his team as well as we go through this process. I'd like to also take us through as a board what we look at before our monitoring. Does it clearly show what is being monitored? Does it clearly show data for the 3 previous reporting periods? Does it clearly show the superintendent's evaluation of performance? Does it clearly show supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation if the district is not at a target, or the superintendent's evaluation indicates implementation is not on track? Does the monitoring report clearly describe any needed next steps? I would like to ask my board, have we seen those on these monitoring reports?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. I'm seeing some heads nod. So now what we will do next is go into monitoring. Before we do that, Dr. Ahart, is there anything that you would like to speak to about the report first before we go in to start asking questions of you and your team?
Yeah, I would just mention a couple of things. For the all third grade reading, the evaluation is not compliant. I do want to point out, however, that there were bigger jumps from winter to spring than from fall to winter. So, you know, there's a bit of a rebound effect, and that from fall to spring, the all third grade group had a better increase, significantly better increase than third graders across the state, as well as third graders in the area education agency 11
Excuse me,
area.
Dr. Ahart, I'm sorry. I would just like to remind everybody, if you could be muted, I'm hearing some kind of noise, so it's a little bit hard to hear what you're saying as well. Dr. Ahart, so just please make sure you're all muted so we're able to hear the speaker. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So while we're not at target, we certainly saw a significant increase as compared to our peers around the state and around central Iowa. Um, and that's due, in large part to more student-teacher contact from winter to spring, especially, and more fidelity in providing interventions, which I think you see a pretty clear indication of that uh, in the data. In regard to the third grade black male report, while we did not have as good of gains this year in the third grade black male report, we did have better gains than we did in the 3 years previous, which I think indicates that while we did have some interrupted instruction over the course of this year of the pandemic, we did have a good year performance-wise by those same comparisons that I made with the all student group. We took a big hit in the second grade, and we're trying to put our finger exactly on why. If you'll note in the third grade black male report, the second grade group, we really took a hit there, and we're trying to get down to exactly what the issue was with that, because progress monitoring was just about on target. So we don't have a super clear explanation of why the spring scores were not higher than reported. However, at the other groups, we did significantly better, especially at first grade. Our black male students did significantly better than both our all students group in terms of growth, as well as our white students group. So we seem to have overall an appropriate focus on accelerating progress for black males. Certainly a lot more progress to go, which is also why the black male report was evaluated as non-compliant. We see signs of things heading back in the right direction pretty significantly in most cases. And we do have some additional steps in addition to well over 1,100 students who are currently at risk, or labeled at risk or persistently at risk according to the FAST data, signed up for 1 or 2 sessions of summer school this summer, which will be absolutely a support. The other couple of things that I want to call special attention to, that we've been really working at ensuring that every student, regardless of what group they're in, has access to grade level curriculum. When our students aren't, especially at this young age, getting access to grade level curriculum, we can never expect them to catch up. So those efforts will continue, but something that we'll be getting to much more deeply as we move forward is more strategy in terms of the tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. If you recall the kind of the intervention RTI triangle, where you expect most of the triangle to be hit by tier 1, 80-85% hit by tier 1. We didn't have as many students being served in that as we needed. That tier 2, which would typically be about 10%, and tier 3 somewhere in the neighborhood of 5%, we're giving more focus this year and providing more guidance this year, and ensuring that we're doing that more strategically, and also in a way that does not, which sometimes has happened in the past, remove students from grade level instruction, but is truly an intervention that is above and beyond what they would be receiving and what they are receiving in their normal English language arts block. So those students won't be pulled out to get extra support and have it really not be extra support, but actually removal from grade level instruction. We'll also be providing more support with our EL curriculum implementation. We are essentially fully implemented. We had some challenges this year because of the changes in the calendar, as well as having to harvest more time during the regular year for instruction, that we did not have as much professional development time for our teachers, especially those teachers who had not piloted the EL curriculum previously. So we will be providing more EL support over the course of this next year. which we think will be a tremendous service to our students. So you'll see that in the reports, but I wanted to call special attention to that. We're in the process of creating some after school or extended day programming for the following year. That's not listed here because we don't have that completely detailed out. But we'll be providing some after school experiences, extended day experiences that heretofore have not been available, that will be available for the vast majority of our students, with a particular focus, just like summer school, on those students that are Black male and those students that are not testing at proficient on their either reading in this case or math, which obviously we're not discussing here tonight. So those are kind of my overall statements about both reports. And it's a little difficult to just talk about one report and not talk about the other report. So if we want to jump back and forth between the two, that's fine.
I got it now. You couldn't hear me. Thank you, Dr. Ahart. I did want to note to the board, we will be talking about these separately, as though I know we have them together. That is due because we do have a person that will be speaking to the Black male monitoring report for agenda item C2. So if we could start and have our questions geared towards right now, our third grade reading monitoring report. I know Dr. Ahart has talked about both reports and kind of given you an overall of response back, but if we could start with our questions, looking at our who, what, and why questions concerning third grade reading, this monitoring report. I just want to remind you that any future questions of like what the district has planned in the future, we would like to save those to the end. And I also would like to encourage any of my board colleagues that if I miss that and someone is asking a question that is futuristic, please step in and say something, as I will be listening intently to the questions. But if I happen to miss that, please feel free to jump in and make me aware of that. But does anyone have any who, what, and why questions? The three questions we begin to ask at the beginning, kind of getting a better understanding of the current reality for our third grade students in literacy.
I'll go ahead and ask the first question. So who right now is not at level? I mean, I know we can see numbers, but what's happening with those students that are not at grade level? Even looking at past 3-year data prior to this current year, I mean, our numbers are below what they were 3 years ago. And I don't know if that maybe has to do with testing as well. We also know there's an implementation of new curriculum, but who are those students that are not meeting benchmark right now? What can you tell us about them?
We're struggling, and this is partly due to curriculum rollout this year, but special education continues to be an area that we're lagging in. So there are certainly some access to grade level issues there that need to be addressed systemically. ELL, not a surprise, especially at this early age, continues to be an area where we need to continue to put focus and resources. And if you, I'll recall one of the successes that we had in the legislative session this year is that weighted funding formula. So those students that come to us with more need in ELL will be in a position to better support those students moving forward. And then our Black students, although we will be talking about this in the second report, both Black male and female students, although the goal is Black male, certainly we are behind in both of those areas. We do think this EL curriculum does help get to that, also with our Latinx students and Asian students, because the materials that we're using both are more responsive to a variety of different cultures and backgrounds, but also, if you recall, are not dependent on students having, bringing a bunch of prior knowledge that tends to be sort of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, for a better way of describing it, so that we're truly measuring what their actual proficiency is, and not actually measuring cultural, white cultural competency. So, those are the areas that we see the biggest gaps, and where we need to continue to focus and ensure that students aren't being pigeonholed because of background or other labels.
Can I just quick ask a clarifying question? Because you talked about special education. Of the students that are special education, do you have a rough percentage of how many are special education because of behavior versus educational needs?
I don't have that, but I certainly can report that. You mean by behavior versus learning disability?
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that has any more questions? Ms. Sawyer, did you have any more questions?
Yeah, I didn't know if the others wanted to jump in. I have
I would
another.
say go ahead. Yeah, go ahead
Okay.
and keep going. Yep.
Okay. Yep. So on page 3 of the report, under the 1B, percentage of first grade students, right now, individual school status, there was 1 of 38 elementary schools that met their targets. What can you tell us about what was going right in that school, and what were they doing well that was helpful for them that maybe could be replicated? Is there anything to replicate in other schools?
We actually did take a look at what commonalities can we find among the schools. So if you look at, I'm not scrolling real fast here. You were looking at what page?
Page 3.
Okay, so if you go to page 1, you'll see. Whoops, I'm on the wrong report. You'll see for third grade, there's 5 of 38, then 1 of 38 for first grade, 6 out of 38 for second grade, 9 out of 38, and then the progress measure monitoring is a little bit different. But it's really difficult to draw a clear line of connection among those schools. Part of it has to do with other characteristics of the relatively low number of students in that category that school has, if that makes sense. So you have, if you have a smaller N and you do an effective job with a smaller number of students, those numbers, reflect that you can make your goal. So the other piece of that is that we set the school targets individually, so that the collective effect is that we reach the board, the all district target. And so some schools, while they may have grown more than, in this case, there may be schools whose Black male students grew more than this one school that met its individual targets. This school may have had lower individual targets because their starting point was higher, if that makes sense. So some of the schools have more aggressive goals because of their starting point. So it was really difficult to find a through line where we could say, oh, this school has kind of captured the magic, and how can we replicate that, if that makes sense.
Can I just follow up and ask a clarifying question to that? Are you saying that class size is a factor in those schools that are achieving
No,
the,
I'm
the
saying,
goal?
no, I'm saying that in some cases it's the percentage of Black male students that they have.
This is for all
Versus-
students that we're looking at now, not Black
Oh,
males.
oh shoot, I'm sorry, I'm confusing our two reports. No, I would not say that it's a class size. I would say that it's more the starting point that those schools had. So if they have a more aggressive goal in that particular school, they may have grown but not met the target. But if you go from, say, the first grade, which is 1 out of 38, and second grade, which is 6 out of 38, and third grade, which was 5 out of 38, those are not all the same schools. In other words, there's variance by grade level among the schools. So the 5 that met the third grade, their third grade target did not include the 4 schools in kindergarten, for instance, and didn't include the 6 schools in the second grade target, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? In other words, the first grade, we're looking at the schools whose first grade made the target, right? So let's say school A met their target. In second grade, the schools that met the target, it may not include school A. It might be B, C, and D. And so there's not a clear through line that one school has the exact same progress at all grade levels. And the grade levels also have different targets based on their performance the prior years.
Do you by chance, do you know if there are any schools that have been able to meet benchmarks in all 3, or at all, kindergarten, first, second, and third?
I should have been able to. I probably could have told you that 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure if any of them met it at all 3. There's some overlap, but they're not consistent school to school or target to target.
I have a question. So on the all third grade reading, all students report, the growth in the students meeting the benchmark from winter to spring was an even 5 points, which, I know there's no statistical significance attached to it, but that seemed like a pretty large jump. Can you put some context around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we think impacted it is actually a couple of things, and one's maybe a little bit counterintuitive. One is, as we moved through second semester, which captured most of this measurement period, more students had more contact with their teachers. Interventions were more consistently delivered timely. And so it was just a more normal rhythm and frequency that students were receiving their instruction and receiving, and more students receiving in-person instruction, obviously. The second thing that we're trying to ensure that we capitalize on is the implementation of EL was actually, we believe, more consistent school to school, which helped, and we think that it was more consistent because we had to rely so much on Canvas that it was easier to keep most everyone on track and on pace throughout the school year, because because teachers had gotten in the habit and building leaders had gotten in the habit of, because of the virtual start, of tapping into Canvas, staying better connected with asking questions and knowing exactly where they were and where we recommended that they should be. And so we think that there's some lessons to be learned there in other areas where, since we have this Canvas tool and almost all of our staff are really fluid with it now, that we can improve implementation in other areas. because of that.
I could maybe piggyback not really piggyback, but do we know of the students who, how many of the students, what the breakdown was of virtual versus in person, and if that had any bearing on whether or not students were meeting benchmark or not?
That is a good question. I'm going to ask if someone on the line has a good answer to that question, because I don't have that at my fingertips. I think there was quite a bit of variance. I don't know if Kelly or Noelle, if you have insights to that particular question.
Kelly, you're muted.
Oh my goodness. Was the question,
was there a correlation between
yeah.
proficiency and being virtual or being in person?
Yeah. Yes, we had pulled that data, or had Mary's team pull that for us. And so it does seem across the board. There are some anomalies, but the students that were virtual made less gain than the students who were in person, pretty much across all grade levels. Now, there were classrooms where that is not the case, in grade levels in a school, perhaps it's not the case, but across the board, our students made less gains if they were fully 100% virtual.
The only thing I might add to that is the younger the student, the more the discrepancy, which isn't really a surprise, but the data confirm that.
Yeah,
so
and our
K1,
data overall, sorry, Noelle.
Yeah, K1 was most negatively impacted by the virtual option, or the 100% virtual, than the older students.
And that kind of shows in our growth. Our kindergarten typically makes more growth than they did this year. I mean, we still made positive growth and more growth than if you look across like AEA and AEA schools and state schools. We at least made positive trend, but that definitely supports the idea that virtual was pretty tough on our youngest students to start the year out.
I'm pulling up the data here. It looks like the students who were 100% virtual in kindergarten on average saw about an 11 to 12% decrease in percent meeting benchmark. And then it increases in the upper grades to around anywhere between, looks like 1.5% to about 6% gain. So it varies by grade level. So the gain was a lot less in the virtual, and actually negative in the in the kindergarten.
I had a question. Dr. Ahart had mentioned, and I don't think I'm out of sequence, but if I am, please let me know. He had mentioned trying to create opportunities for more of a supportive environment for students who are behind, and maybe a more intensive approach for some of them, especially in the summer months and after school and extended time. I have to assume that that's optional and not required, but is there anything else beyond sort of those optional experiences that we could embed into the school day that might help accelerate where many of the students are that are lagging behind?
Well, we continue to work on refining the regular school day instruction, especially ensuring that regardless of which classroom a student is being served in, that they're receiving everything that we expect them to receive, including grade level instruction. So we've knocked down a significant number of barriers there, but there's still a ways to go, especially with our students with IEPs. in particular. So we'll continue to to ensure that we remove any remaining barriers in that regard, and then ensuring that we are with fidelity implementing the EL curriculum. We did see significant growth when we had access to the students second semester, and we had really good what I would consider very good progress the year prior until we were interrupted with COVID. So I feel like we're on the right track in that regard, and that the biggest thing that we can do is provide more time, because we're taking a pretty significant chunk of the day dedicated to literacy instruction right now, and without sacrificing some of those other things that are really engaging for our students and necessary for their development. It's difficult to find more opportunities there, if that makes sense. Now, on the question of optional versus required, that's an interesting question, and one that we could explore in making some additional extended daytime a requirement, if that's a road that we would want to go down. There are obviously, as with most other things, pros and cons to that. But when we make those avenues available, and we're providing transportation and nutrition and what I think will be a highly engaging environment, I really think we're going to entice a lot of the students that we really want to take advantage of that to sign on. But that's certainly a question that could be explored as a policy matter.
Yeah, I just wonder, for so many students, especially, in the earlier grades, we know how important it is for them to sort of gain that traction early, so that they're better positioned to take advantage of everything else that happens sort of subsequent, and especially with reading and math. Those are such huge building blocks for, future learning. And I just wonder if we have to be much more aggressive in terms of strategies, because I think it's, almost incumbent upon us to create the framework for not only the expectations that we have for all students, but the environment that we create for them to learn. And if that means something that is beyond what we typically have done from an optional perspective, we might be to the point where, tipping that scale could create some really, significant acceleration for those students. So I just feel like we've sort of been in this messy middle for a while, and maybe just sort of pushing the envelope in ways that are beyond what we typically have done might make a huge difference, and this might be the time to think about doing that.
I do want to say that some of our schools that made the largest gains and larger gains than they have in the past really focused on ensuring that everyone had grade level instruction. So it wasn't about intervention or trying to remediate. They upped the practice and exposure that the students had. So they gave more time in sort of that practice of automaticity at grade level for every student, no matter what their learning deficit was. And that seemed to have a larger impact than other schools who did more remediation. So, and we don't have enough data that would, make that a conclusive statement, but it certainly is something that we want to look into, because there are several schools that put in some plans to ensure that their students were not being pulled out of that grade level instruction, and then adding to that another, like, practice 10, 15, 20 minutes a day for every student just to practice that grade level. And they saw significant gains in many of their grade levels, which they attribute even with their students with disabilities and their English language learners.
Dr. Ahart, just a moment ago, you mentioned removing barriers for students with IEPs. What do you see those barriers? What are they?
Well, there's a couple that are, I think, perhaps most problematic. One is coordinating the services, the additional services that a lot of our students with IEPs are required to receive, and making sure that that's coordinated with their regular classroom instruction, such that they don't inadvertently miss some of that grade level instruction because of a pullout situation. So those students that receive one-on-one and small group support are receiving that support, from a member of the special education team in that building, and in an effort to make sure that all the students are receiving what's required by their IEP in terms of one-on-one or small group intervention, that most oftentimes has to come from at the expense of something else, if that makes sense. So to make sure that as much as is possible, that the literacy time is protected from that, so that those students, because of needing some additional support, possibly in literacy, possibly in something else, aren't missing out on their core grade level instruction with their peers and at grade level. That's one of the biggest. That's one of the biggest issues. And then we can always stand to improve on ensuring that as much as we can, that students with an IEP, especially at the early levels, are receiving their additional support in the regular classroom with their special education teacher when that's necessary. So it becomes a real challenge in coordinating the limited staff and making sure that everybody, each of the students, gets what it is that's required of their IEP, but doesn't receive it at the expense of their core instruction, in this case in literacy. It's really
Dr.
it's
Ahart.
a matter
Sorry.
of getting high and tight on these little things that we all know are important, but we're sometimes not as disciplined about executing. And so we need to make sure that we stay really, really disciplined, especially in terms of reading, to make sure that all of these things that we know matter, that we actually behave as though they matter, and so that no student gets shortchanged on instruction. And I'm sorry, I cut someone off inadvertently there.
Oh, that's okay. I just was thinking out loud a little bit about those students and those buildings where we have students that are not performing as well as we had hoped. And I wonder if there are resource allocation questions that we need to begin to explore. I know right now we provide a lot of latitude at the building level for principals to allocate staff appropriately based on the needs of a building, the needs of the students, etc. But I also wonder if at some point being much more intentional about those buildings, especially that we have a number or a large percentage of students that are not performing, if we need to identify other resources that need to be allocated in much the same way we've sort of prioritized Black males and have really sort of set aside resources to really accelerate the progress of that particular group, recognizing that if we can get them to where they need to be, the rest of the district will rise as well. But I wonder if there are resource questions that should be explored more as they relate to how we support and resource buildings where we have a larger percentage of underperforming students, so that we can, again, sort of push the envelope on equity based on geography, based on building level performance, and based on the needs of students.
The resource allocation issue and focusing it on need is absolutely a valid point and very tricky due to Title I rules that require us to demonstrate that Title I funding is above and beyond what a school would have gotten if they were not Title I, and ensuring that all schools are. And this is where the term equity gets confused sometimes in policy, because by equity, what they really mean is the same. So that is one thing that we have not done, that we absolutely could explore is, which is something that would have to be worked out certainly with our teachers association, is shifting staff based on pay rate, if that makes sense. Because now we have to, which we used to be able to do, we didn't have to worry about. Now we do, because it's total cost of any Title I service, not equivalency, but actual cost. So if we do have a school that, because of having a more veteran Title I staff, if we transfer that person, do a forced transfer so that actually 2 staff could be hired, for instance. I mean, that is an area that we can absolutely explore, because it is so aggravating to have to follow those rules, because some schools, once they find out the cost of their staff, they realize, well, I don't have enough to pay for another staff person, but I don't really have a good way to leverage my remaining resources that have to stay with that building, in a way that's actually going to accelerate performance. And so that is, I do think that that's another policy area that we can more aggressively explore in the name of students at the, perhaps the distaste sometimes of staff, but doing it absolutely for the right reasons.
I have an unrelated question. I mean, I guess it's kind of along those same lines, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the buildings setting their individual goals and what are the factors and things that go into that?
Yeah, well, we help the buildings set their goals. They don't just choose them. So what we try to do is we figure out what the overall target is, and with the idea that if every school meets their target, we'll meet the district target. Now we can't, if everybody increases the same amount, unless you set it just right, you'll not hit the district target. And the higher achieving a school is, the more difficult it is sometimes to actually inch up further. So it gets a little bit complicated, but what we attempt to do is make a target that's a stretch goal but reachable for every school, with the idea that when everybody hits it, we're absolutely certain that we all hit our goal. Now, we could hit the district goal with not every building hitting the target if some buildings exceed what their target is, but what we want is enough of a stretch that everyone has to push to make it, and that we're also accelerating the growth of those students who are most deficient, so that we're providing more equitable outcomes across the board. So I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but it gets to be a little bit complicated to actually map out exactly how that works.
Yeah.
But that's the principle behind it.
So are you basically saying that if my school started at 32 on the way to 72, then it'd be 16 points a year or whatever over those 5? But if yours started at 62, then it'd be 2 points per year to get to 72? Or is it more complicated than that?
It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the general, that's the general idea. We don't want to say we met the district goal, but you can't expect that from from your kids in your school. You know, we would like to see everybody, you know, hovering around that district goal. Obviously, there's going to be variation school to school, but we want everybody to be invested in getting it so that all of our students are receiving that same energy and focus and consistency. So we think it's important that everybody has a goal that's a stretch goal, and just as you see in the data here, you know, there's not typically there's variance within schools by grade level for a variety of factors, and so it's not typically a universal, this school knocked it out of the park and this one didn't. There's variance by grade level too. So yeah, you got the general gist of it, but it's a little bit more refined than that.
I had one other quick question. I'm going to go back to something that either Kim or Kelly raised earlier relative to the students who are underperforming. So is there any other student demographic or behavior data, Tom, that might inform what we're seeing? Are there any other sort of X factors out there that we know of that might be impacting student outcomes? I mean, you've already mentioned IEPs, let's see, ELL, special ed, but is there anything else that is in concentrations that we should consider?
Attendance is a through line. We're almost certain that if a student, and I can't tell you exactly where the cut point would be, but if attendance is below a certain mark, we're pretty certain they're not going to be, they won't be demonstrating the growth that we need. You know, and that's reflected in, I think we saw that writ large with you know, the hybrid model. But even when we were, even with the 2/3 of the students that were in person every day, if their attendance is poor, and they didn't come in, you know, at right at about grade level, very slim chances that we're going to get them to the point that they needed to be to hit benchmark.
If I recall, there were a few years ago, we had a contract with a local nonprofit. Was it Embark or somebody else that was really focused on student attendance and really trying to up the ante for students whose attendance was not as regular as needed to be in order for them to progress? Do we still have any external partnerships or organizations that are working with us around attendance?
Certainly we do indirectly. I don't know if we have anything as specific as, and you're right, it was Embark. I don't know if we have anything that specifically targeted just on attendance, but we certainly are working with a number of partners trying to improve attendance, but not particularly focused on, you know, just attendance, but on some of the correlates of you know, some of the causes of the poor attendance.
Okay, we've asked some of our questions in the who, what, and why section. Do we have any futuristic questions going forward? Any how questions that anyone might have? Any of my board colleagues have any of those questions?
I think we've had a few of those already.
Dr. Ahart, in response to your, in the response to your data, you identify that priority actions are implementing high quality curriculum. And this has been your response to data this is the third, I believe, report that's been the top response or the priority response. So can you give us some insight into what is currently happening to identify the measures at which identify a high implementation school? How frequently are we measuring each building and whether or not that implementation is where it needs to be? How are we monitoring? And what is the evaluative process for buildings that are not currently in that high quality implementation standard?
Yeah, so principals and their leadership teams have measures, though, visiting classrooms and visiting classrooms randomly over a cycle of time to see where they are. But we also have teams that come in from district office to do essentially audits, I guess is what I would call it, random walkthroughs, identifying where we're not seeing correct implementation, and then working primarily with the principal supervisor and the principal and her leadership team to figure out where more support needs to happen, where what in what classrooms are we not getting the level of implementation that we need to see the results that we think that the correct implementation can promise. So there's a rotation, that happens with additional support available when the need calls for it. We don't, as you can imagine, with hundreds and hundreds of classrooms at these grade levels and limited staff to be in and out of them, it's not a perfect system. But there is a protocol that's used that we think is quite effective, and as Ms. Schofield mentioned a few answers ago, certainly when that becomes the focus of the leadership team in the building, and that's a top priority, more of that happens. And if they're disciplined about that, we know that student performance follows.
Would you say that we have high implementation schools right now, where every time we go in, we are seeing exactly what would be expected in the use of the curriculum and the implementation of the curriculum? And to follow up to that, are we seeing the achievement in those schools that we would consider high implementation schools?
I would say generally yes and yes. However, what I could give a more precise answer on is grade levels. We certainly have grade levels within some buildings that are knocking it out of the park, and I could virtually guarantee you that every time you walked into that classroom, you'd see exactly what you would expect to see and hear what you expected to hear. To say that building wide, I'm less confident that I could say 100% of the time you will find it. But the point that you get at, I think, is yes, at grade levels where in buildings where there's been a true commitment to that, and it's been monitored, and meaningful feedback is given to the teachers, and where we do see consistent, highly fidelitous implementation. There is a direct correlation to how that class of students performs. So I would say we're at a really strong level district wide, but we're not at. I wouldn't say we have one school that I would say is 100% exactly where we would want to see them, but close.
And then how are we holding teams accountable for ensuring proper implementation and fidelity in implementation moving forward? Have we added this to an evaluative process? Are we discussing it during evaluations? Is it just a walkthrough and a checklist of what you see during a random observation, or those audits, as you called them? What does that look like for ensuring that we're moving in the right direction moving forward?
It's certainly part of it's concretely a part of principal evaluations. It's not as directly tied to teacher evaluation, although that does figure into the Iowa teaching standards, which form the basis of the teacher evaluation system. It's the data goes back to the teacher level, and then principal or instructional coach works with those teachers that have shown a need to have extra support in that regard. And then the PLCs that each of our schools has, and at this level it would be by grade level, look at that data as well. And they certainly can do the crosswalk between reported level of implementation, from a neutral outside party, and the progress that their students make. So I would say that there's accountability, but there's not to say there's a straight line between a teacher evaluation and a teacher's implementation of the curriculum. It's a bit difficult to say that there's a direct line there at this point, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I would have similar questions around your second priority action response to data, which is ensuring access to grade level instruction. How do we know, where are the receipts, essentially? How do we know that buildings are providing that grade level access? How are we holding them accountable? Are we auditing that as well? What are we doing to ensure that this happens?
Well, that happens in much the same way. However, that part gets a little bit more difficult to monitor effectively, just because of the nature of the variety of services that our students receive. I don't know if I have a principal supervisor on the line that might speak to that in a little bit more detail, but it's a bit more complicated to get a true, accurate picture, student by student, and how much time, to give a defensible number that says this percentage of students missed this percentage of core instruction. It really has to be designed into how the building creates its schedule, and how it deploys staff, and how it prioritizes, in this case, the reading instruction at grade level.
So
Have the principals been given the directive to make these scheduling changes? I'm sorry, Kelly.
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating that? There was a little
Have
static.
the principals been given a directive to change their building level schedules to ensure that this happens?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it a directive. Some of these challenges are notoriously difficult to overcome in certain situations, and so I think it's a bit more complicated than giving a principal a directive. It really has to be a collaboration between the special education support team, ELL support team, with the principal supervisor, trying to help engineer those solutions such that we have the appropriate resources for every building principal to ensure that happens.
Thank you.
Dr. Ahart, I had a question. Looking at next steps, I think on page 8, it talks about all schools will have access to an EL coach for the upcoming school year. How do you see that impacting the data in any way? And then also, kind of what are the outcomes that you're looking for that by having a coach in all the buildings to help support that implementation?
Yeah, so this is a resource issue. So the typical staff in a building, sets up how they're observing and monitoring what's happening in the classrooms. When a situation is encountered that requires some more intensive support, or I would describe it as more frequent support for a particular classroom or set of classrooms, it's difficult for a school to provide that without pulling away from keeping up the quality measures in the rest of the school. So having a resource that can specifically focus on this and provide more dedicated time specific to the implementation of the curriculum and ensuring that the skills block is actually being executed and the frequency that's required. Allows the building to make sure that while they're providing needed support in this classroom, they're not neglecting these other classrooms at the same time. So we would see what we would expect to see is more consistency in performance classroom to classroom within a building, and therefore more consistency building to building as a result of that.
Dr. Ahart, I had just had a question. I know earlier in the conversation you had talked about really the kindergarten students and what we were seeing with them and in terms of, you know, not meeting benchmark. So, and I wouldn't say it's just necessarily for the kindergarten students, but really as you think through this fall, what is going to be the expectation for students coming in, and how will we, like, how are we going to level set, if that's even possible, and what might be different?
I think the biggest difference that we'll see, and again, you know, the proof is in the pudding. We'll see we'll see when our students return and we have that first chance to kind of figure out where everybody is. We'll see some adjustments in how we spend time during the regular school day to ensure that we're necessary accelerating till we get to where the students are at a point where we would expect them to be, to move on at the regular pace. So there may be some, even though it pains me to say it, there may be some subtraction from some other areas to ensure that we're building up literacy skills, because as Ms. Caldwell Johnson said earlier, you know, we need as much as possible to have students on track at each grade level in literacy and math, or they pay a much bigger price beyond that. So there will be some modifications in how teachers are spending time with their students to ensure that there's enough frequency and repetition to get those core skills in place where where we need them by the end of this school year.
Just another quick clarifying question. On page 7, it's under the priority actions and evidence of implementation. And second line, about midway through that sentence, or through the line, it says, when the changes have been fully implemented and all needed supports are in place. When is that going to happen? Like, do you have an expectation for that?
I'm sorry, can you tell me again where you are?
Yeah, so it's on page 7, priority actions and evidence of implementation, and it's the second, according to mine when I printed it off, it's the second line down, and it talks about let me see.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so when changes have been fully implemented and all needed supports are in place.
When will that happen?
Yeah, so, and it's talking about the high quality curriculum and the grade level instruction. So kind of what's that end date for full implementation? Or are you comfortable saying it's there?
I would say right now it's largely in place. What we need to stay on top of is monitoring, especially when we have, you know, new teachers coming in, that we stay on top of it in every classroom and ensure that we're providing the support needed in a classroom where, for whatever reason, there isn't full implementation or supports in place. So I'd say we're in really good shape, but we're not perfect. I mean, this is something that I think in the past, what you typically see in schools is there's a curriculum adoption, teachers receive professional development, building staff receives professional development. You go through a year of implementation and then basically call it good. What we're saying is, we're never really going to be 100% there in every single classroom. So what we need to do is continue to monitor, continue to make sure that that none of our students is experiencing a gap because of either a new teacher or somebody who just, for whatever reason, is struggling to implement the curriculum, that we're staying on top of each and every one of those situations. So I'd say largely it's in place, but it's a whole combination of things that we're referring to here that need to be in place. And so continuing to tweak the system to make sure that there's ready access and availability anytime a need is determined.
I would just have a final comment. These are more just editing purposes of the report, but on page 7, under second grade, at least the one I printed off over the weekend, it says, I think it's the second sentence, all groups showed an increase from fall of 2021 to spring of 2022. We have not seen that time frame yet, so I think those dates need adjusting.
Oh, oh my gosh, I did not even catch that.
No, and that's fine. And then I think it's meant to say, let me see, it'd be like the third line, it starts off grade had less student groups meet, or, and I think that's supposed to be exceed, E-X-C-E-E-D.
Yeah, it is supposed to be exceed, yeah.
Those are just grammatics. I thought I'd point those out.
Thank you.
And I would just like to comment on if our priority actions are the implementing high quality curriculum and ensuring access, and you feel that it's largely in place currently, outside of just new teachers coming in and kind of what I would categorize as a maintenance level, if we're just working on new teachers coming in and getting everybody up to speed, how is it that those are our highest priority items if it's already in place? So I guess I don't understand if this truly is our high priority focus moving forward, or if I just don't understand that response.
Yeah, it's a high priority because we know we have a very high level of confidence that it works, and we can't get to a point where we think we have it in place and then put it on autopilot. We have to ensure that it continues to be refined so that it gets better and better and better. You can implement with fidelity, but if you're not implementing with fidelity every day, and every student isn't there every day to receive the benefits of that, then we're going to lose ground. So what we're attempting to say here is that these are hugely important, and that when teachers are getting active professional development on new curriculum, you tend to get to a point where you're feeling pretty good about things. But if we don't keep our foot on the gas and continue to stay disciplined, and continue to focus and go through that continuous improvement cycle, week over week, quarter over quarter, semester over semester, year over year, then you tend to slip back and roll into prior behaviors that were not as productive. So we need to continue to emphasize that the implementing the high quality curriculum and ensuring that everybody has access to grade level instruction aggressively, because that has not necessarily been the practice of habit in the past. So we really need to change the habits of every teacher for whose classroom this isn't happening absolutely 100% consistently, and have this continue to be priority one for our building leadership teams, because it's just there's too much complexity to say, okay, we got there, now it's in place, we can move on to something else.
So I think I'm the one that jumped the gun a little bit in terms of moving forward with a few future-focused items. But I'd like to go back to the 3 that we've discussed around building level resource allocation, required additional time, and then an attendance strategy to determine whether or not there's any validity in us pursuing any or all of those in a way that might help inform the work moving forward, and maybe create some space to allow us to maybe do things a little differently. And it seems to me that, any or all of the above might be things that we might wish to pursue. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what latitude we have or flexibility we have in our current budget, but it seems to me that maybe understanding a little more about what those things might mean and do and how they might impact not only our progress measures but our goals might be something that we may wish to consider, and I would just offer that for our consideration.
Are there any other questions before I ask for the motion and then we move on to our next monitoring report? Okay, may I have a motion and a second to accept the third grade reading monitoring report as providing evidence for compliance with a reasonable interpretation of student expectations policy 4.11.A?
And I suppose if I could, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I was just going to ask, as we kind of follow up on our monitoring reports to Dr. Ahart, what can we do to assist you?
I think that one thing to keep in mind is I think Ms. Martirano's last question touched on a bit, is that teaching reading is a complicated venture, and while it may be frustrating to the board to see that implementing high quality curriculum and access to grade level core instruction don't seem sexy, we know that it works. And one thing that the field of education, I'll speak broadly, is notoriously undisciplined about is seeing through an implementation till an actual change in the institution occurs. And so it's not sexy implementing a high quality curriculum, but it works. And we need to stay disciplined about that. And we need to continue to monitor. And I will tell you that this district, the systems we have in place to monitor implementation, it's impressive, the data that collectively our principals have on their own building and where support needs to be provided because of the support that we have from our teaching and learning team. But it works. And when you see these research studies about this curriculum works, well, they say it works if you do X, Y, and Z in this sequence with this frequency and this amount of time, especially for these populations. We have to take that seriously and actually do it and make sure that every single student receives that. And so the variation from classroom to classroom to classroom, we need to ensure that that's not there, because that's enough difference for us not to reach our goals. And those students who aren't receiving it are getting cheated. And so it's a difficult work, first of all, because teaching reading is complicated. Every single student comes in with a different set of background skills and a different home experience and different challenges just intellectually, just how their brain works. And to make sure that every single student is getting this complex work, is getting all the extra supports that they need as required by their ELL programming or their special education programming, and still getting that core instruction in the way that's intended to be provided, in the amount of time it's intended to be provided, with the frequency that it's intended to be provided. That's not the stuff that turns people on, but it's the stuff that we know works. And so we have to stay disciplined to that and ensure that that's happening consistently in every single classroom for every single student. And it's not something that typically school districts do real well. We know that it moves the needle, and Kelly has some examples, and I've seen the data, and I can think of one building in particular that probably would surprise a lot of people in here, but they really, they bought into that. It's like that principal said, by God, I'm going to make sure that we're implementing with fidelity, and it works for all of our kids. But it's hard to do that to do that with discipline over time if you're a classroom teacher. So we need to continue to motivate them. We need to continue to make sure that they're getting monitored in an appropriate way and receiving meaningful feedback to adjust their practice. And that's as blah as it probably sounds in this report, it's absolutely necessary. And we know that it works. So we have to stay disciplined to doing that.
So is there?
I guess the main thing is that how the board can help is to recognize that that's really important and to encourage our teachers to hang with it, even though it might feel like, gosh, all we talk about is literacy, all we talk about is literacy. Yeah, it's really important. And if these kids don't read, we're not doing our job. And we know we can do it. We know we have the right materials. We know we have the right people, but they have to do the right stuff at the right time. And we can't create more time. I mean, we're going to be buying some time, as we have these ARA and ESSER dollars. That's not going to last forever, but we do know if we do the right stuff in the classroom and stay disciplined about it, and we get our kids here. So the two things would be to recognize that, and the other thing would be whatever the board can do collectively and individually to send that message that it's really important for our kids to be at school every single day. Every single day. Not only do they miss out on instruction when they're not there, but they miss out on relationship building, and feeling a part of the culture of the school and a part of the culture of their classroom, and letting their teachers and the other support staff build relationships with them, because the better we know our kids, the more effectively we can serve them. So the more we can do, have that voice in the community saying we'll get the job done, but we need access. So be at school every day and take advantage of every single extended learning opportunity that we provide. We had really good luck recruiting students this summer that are identified as at risk or persistently at risk, but one summer is not going to cut it. So it needs to be a consistent effort.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart, and thank you, Ms. Sawyer, for asking that question of how we could help as a school board. Now, if I may have a motion and a second to accept the third grade monitoring report as providing evidence for compliance with a reasonable interpretation of student expectation policy 4.11a.
Sawyer, so move acceptance of the report.
Barron, second.
Martirano, second.
Looks like we have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Mr. Barron. Ms. Jenkins, could you please take the vote?
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is C2, Blackmail Monitoring Report. I know Superintendent Ahart, you've already talked a little bit about the report as well. Is there anything you wanted to add before? I see we have a speaker as well for this.
No, I don't think I have anything further to add.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Jenkins, I see that we have a speaker to this agenda item. They will be given 5 minutes to address the board.
And then Oliver.
Hi, Brandon Oliver again. I live at 3021 Southwest 29th Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50321. I appreciate the idea of closing the gap between all students and Black male students. It's important our efforts of anti-racism are implemented in everything we do. Reading goals are reliant on many factors, and I'd like to shed light on one of those factors. Thanks to the transparency and the availability of the monitoring reports, I was able to view the third grade reading monitoring report and the Black male reading monitoring report. I noticed a few things that may help give us more understanding and intentionality of closing the gap. I noticed the next steps, which are listed at the bottom of each report, are fundamentally copied and pasted from one report to the other, with only a few words changed in one of the steps. This is equality, not equity, and so I predict the gaps will remain. I don't see data on adult behavior anywhere in these reports, yet a priority action in the reports is access to grade level core instruction. In my experience as an educator, student referrals are often accompanied with the student missing instructional time via an intervention of some kind. This may not be in every case, but it does tend to happen. This morning, I did some researching with Tableau of referrals by racial demographics and grade level. I especially encourage you to take a look at the percent of referrals by race and ethnicity for second grade of the 2020 and 2021 school year. Why is it that the percentage of referrals for Black or African American students in second grade was 4 times the enrollment of the percentage of the same students, while the percentage of referrals for white students in second grade was less than 2 times the enrollment of the percentage of white students? Also, take a look at students who identify as more than one race. Percentage of referrals are about 4 times as high for them too. As Dr. Ahart stated, this grade took the biggest hit. What is going on in second grade? Are educators and administrators expected to be part of the restorative work as well as students? Are we saying that Black or African American students are more defiant than other students? Our district data reveals that we document Black or African American students as behaving that way. Or maybe adult behavior and mindsets are currently inequitable. I don't want to assume, but if adults are taking Black males away from instruction time in proportion to the referrals which are being written, then adult behavior is a factor which contributes to the reading gap. And if our white students are seeing adults reprimanding Black students at disproportionate and higher rates than other demographics, think of how they may learn to treat Black people as they grow up. We might be teaching white students biases by our own actions as adults. We might also be teaching students of color that they are a problem. I guarantee they aren't a problem. If we believe in growth mindset, then where is the support and accountability regarding the growth of our educators? And why do we retain educators who don't grow? When I reflect on the district referral data, I see that our district is modeling the criminalization of Black males. Jane Elliott's blue eyes, brown eyes exercise shows the impact that can have on learning. A new bill states we are not allowed to contribute to racial scapegoating, so I suggest we put an end to our adults making Black male children appear to be a problem. The way to do this is to train adults and hold us accountable. I'm confident we can do this while remaining in compliance with HF 802. It won't be comfortable, but the discomfort won't be due to our race or sex. It will be due to inequity itself, or knowing we perpetuate inequity. Me being white doesn't give me discomfort. Me contributing to inequity gives me discomfort. I hope that makes sense. As I spoke about accountability earlier in the evening, if we are not holding our administrators accountable on equity, I question how we can say classroom teachers are being held accountable by administrators. If we're going to be data-driven, let's include data on adult behavior in these reports. Let's stop pushing the narrative that Black male students are a problem in DMPS. Let's be better. I know we can. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no other speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver, for your comments. I would like to now turn it over to my board colleagues to ask any questions pertaining to our third grade male reading report.
Okay, I guess I'll ask a question then, just jumping off of what the speaker said and kind of anticipating the conversation as it is, which is that, you know, a lot of we've heard in the past, a lot of the same remedies for all students are valuable for Black male students, like a strong curriculum and adherence to that curriculum. So I would imagine that you'd be inclined to tell us something along that line. And I guess I'm already getting to I apologize. Let me step back here because I'm getting to the next set of questions. Let me check myself and let somebody ask a question that is about who, what, and something in the past, perhaps.
I do have a quick question. On page 5 of the report, and this is the progress monitoring, This is progress measure 2B, so the second grade. And you had mentioned second grade, there's some anomalies. And actually, this goes into page 6 too in third grade. Looking at progress measures, is what might be a reason for the decline in progress monitored, in the number of students being progress monitored? Are they making progress and they don't need monitored, or is what might be that challenge there?
Yeah, so it's not because they're making progress and they don't need to be monitored, because we're just measuring the students that should be getting progress monitored, and are they? So for were you referencing first grade, did you say?
No, this would be second and third grade. So if you look at the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, from fall to spring, for both of those grades, what we're noticing is a decline in the number of students being progress monitored. A percentage of students being progress monitored.
Yeah, for second grade, that's although it's not exactly where we want to see it, that's not super concerning to me, because it's still hovering at about 95%. So there's a whole bunch of little things that could have impacted, attendance, so forth, that could have attributed to that decline. Let me look at third grade here. Excuse me. Oh, geez. Sorry. Trying to look at these. Second grade. Okay, I just went that way. Somehow it's skipping. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it's about the same drop, a little bit bigger drop in third grade. And I guess I don't have a real good answer to that. I would have anticipated it going up a bit in the spring because of more students being in person, but I might ask Kelly to jump in on that one, because I don't have a good explanation for why there's about 1.5% or a little bit more than that drop.
We did look through that and looked at through specific schools, and our students, we had less students of our virtual students. Many of them either didn't log in to get progress monitored or didn't come in to get progress monitored. So that was some of that. And that was several students in some schools and across the district that added up. So I think, that's the only definitive thing we could point to. I mean, schools were progress monitoring their students that needed to be. When we were spot checking, it just seemed like the virtual students had a harder time getting them in the spring than they did in the winter and the fall.
Do we have a breakdown of number of Black males, maybe who chose virtual versus in person? Based on the last report, we know that definitely students who were virtual struggled and made less gains. But do we know kind of a rough percentage of Black males that were virtual versus in person?
Over the course of the district writ large, we didn't see a whole lot of variance group to group, but I don't know if somebody could pull that in front of them right now to see what the relative percentage of Black male K through third grade were virtual as opposed to all students.
Yeah, I could pull that up. We had less students. So if you look at third grade, we had 48 students, Black male students, who were virtual. And in third grade, all students, we had 506.
looking at page 3 of the data report, our progress measure 1C, our second grade students meeting the FAST benchmark. This was the only group of students that did not. I reviewed the data. Our first graders did, our kindergartners did, etc. Do we know what's happening at second grade that would have caused this for our black male?
I don't know that we have a definitive answer as to why this happened, except for excuse me, I'm struggling with my throat here. Except for the failing to get to the level of automaticity that we would have expected prior to entering second grade, and then starting out all virtual. But I don't know if Kelly, do you have anything more specific than that you can point to?
Now, our team spent several hours digging through school to school. We couldn't find anything. I mean, we looked at attendance. We looked at the number of black males was the number so much smaller. We looked at, we did look at behavior referrals. We looked at attendance. We looked at students who didn't show up to be progress monitored, or get the or not progress monitoring, sorry, the screening, so that maybe that had it. Maybe there were more second graders who didn't come for the spring benchmark screening, but none of those things held true across the district. We dug into specific schools, and there are some areas and some schools that we're going to talk with, some specific schools where second grade was quite a bit low, showed quite a bit lower growth than other grades. So we're going to work with those principals and kind of dig into that data as well, but we couldn't come up with yet as a district reason, like a systemic reason that happened. I can certainly share all the data we did pull on second grade if you want to have it. We have lots of it.
I'm sure. For the 7 out of 35 schools on page 1 that are meeting the individual target for our black male students, do we know what's happening at those buildings for our black males that potentially is not happening at the other buildings?
Many of those schools are the ones I spoke of earlier that were really ensuring that all students had access. So ensuring that those students are in classroom. We're not taking them out for any reason. Many of times when students are having difficulty in the classroom, we take them out. In several of those schools, the administrators start going into the classroom and sitting with the students and helping them engage in the instruction. Those were some of the things that they talked about. They did extra practice and automaticity around the grade level skills in several of those schools. So instead of having a time for remediation, they used that time for all students to get extra practice at grade level. So those are some of the strategies that a large percent of those schools put in place for all their students, and their black males. It impacted them significantly because they had that opportunity to have that access to grade level, which many had not had before.
So when you speak of students that are having difficulty in the classroom, and instead of leaving the classroom, the administrator is going in, am I understanding correctly that difficulty in the classroom could possibly be pertaining to behavior or referral type interactions that would cause a student to be sent to the principal's office? Or are you speaking of for intervention purposes, leaving that core instruction?
Yeah, that would need to be clarified. Both, but mostly making sure that if that student needed supports and scaffolds in the classroom academically, that those are provided. So someone is either providing those or the teacher is providing those for the students so they can access the grade level instruction. But also if they're having behavioral needs, then pull them out, which can lead to a whole mouse and cookie thing, right? So so they've started coming in, or someone would come in and sit with the students, or a support person, administrators, whomever, and just engage the students and get them back into the instruction so they're not missing. So there's no gaps. So instead of coming out and processing and dealing with it and missing that core instruction, they're going in with the students and just processing with them there and trying to help them and get back engaged into the instruction. And that seemed to be successful. That was a focus in a few of those schools, and that seemed to help them increase the scores for their Black male students as well as all students.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I know some may have some futuristic questions in how, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Barron, for the question that you had.
Thanks for remembering. So I guess where I was getting with my question is I don't question the the priority actions and the evidence of implementation. I think those are logical. You guys have explained that logic to us in the past. I also appreciate your statement at the end of the all third grade reading report about the importance of being of fidelity to the implementation or the remedies that we seek. I've been here for 8 years, and I feel like that's always been a value that we hear lifted up from our teaching staff of, okay, don't just drop something new on us every year and expect it to be successful. Give us something and then let it sit for a few years and let us try and get better at it. So I appreciate those two things. So I guess my question then is, in this case, the next steps, the priority actions, they're about instruction. And getting back to what the speaker said earlier, perhaps there's other ways of looking at this goal. And honestly, I'm kind of open to that too. And I would imagine that there are other remedies that you're pursuing that you would say feed directly into the success of the ultimate success of our district on this goal or not. And I'm just curious if there's some. I don't want to let it be in classroom or out of classroom be the dividing line, but more about instruction versus non-instruction remedies. And if you can kind of give some off the cuff on what those look like and how those play in.
Yeah, I think Kelly kind of touched on this in her last response. So the process of looking at the data by classroom or by grade level or by building, one of the conversations that a principal supervisor and the principal and the leadership team are going to have is, okay, so why? In this case, why are Black males not, and you start digging into why? Well, removal from classroom. Mr. Oliver spoke to that. Well, why? How do we change that? We certainly don't have the resources to create a whole different class for kids that we're not effectively engaging in the classroom. So how do we better engage those students in the classroom? So the EL curriculum is part of that, an important part, not the only part. But so when I talked earlier about, when Kelly asked what can the board do, and I was trying to emphasize the importance of staying disciplined to these things that we know work and not letting barriers get in the way. And so one of the things that we have let get in the way is I find this student a distraction, so I'm going to send this student out. Well, then that student is missing instruction. So we have what we have in our school. You know, this is the staff we have. This is the materials we have. How do we better engage? And so some of that is about adults. Most of that is about adults taking different actions. You know, what do we accomplish by sending a student to the office, waiting for the principal or whomever to show up, visit, try to come up with a resolution, and then sending the student back? Well, they've just lost 15 minutes or half an hour, and feel more disconnected when they went back than when they left, probably. So one of those things is re-examining how it is that we navigate the non-engaged student. And there's a lot of different aspects to that. But one of the things and we do a lot more of this now, but I remember a position that I hired when I was at Harding, and it was a behavior interventionist, but they didn't intervene with students, they intervened with staff. So if we had a challenge in a particular room, the staff person would go in and really observe the behaviors of the adult and talk about how are you responding to different stimuli, and what are some other what are some other options that you have to react differently in order to keep all the students engaged and in the classroom. And so that's what a lot of it is. It's difficult to, there are a lot of those types of things, but I think that's a really big one. It's not just, well, here's another way of that may flesh it out with a little more color. The old version of teacher observation would be going in with a checklist and counting how many students were facing the teacher and were well behaved, and you counted those as engaged. And if everything looked in order and was neat and orderly in the room and quiet, then you were a good teacher. That's not what we're looking for. So we don't want a dog and pony show when we walk into a classroom. What we want to see is genuine interaction between among the students, but also between the teacher and the students. And sometimes most times that's not a real linear, clean, this happens for 5 minutes, then this happens for 10 minutes, and then this happens for 5 minutes. But what we want to see is genuine engagement and all of our students being actively engaged in learning. And so that's a different paradigm, and not the way most of our teachers were trained, and not what most of them think an evaluator is looking for when they come into the room. And so a good part of the change has to be, what kind of feedback are we providing to our staff when we go in and do an observation? Is it emphasizing the right things? Is it ignoring the things that we can ignore that really don't get to the end that we want, which is accelerated growth for those students who need accelerated growth? And certainly that can't happen when the student's not in the classroom. So the student achievement data is one thing, but it's not just about teaching better. It's about engaging more effectively. So the go-to when you're problem solving, when it's either the professional learning community or the instructional coach or the principal, when they're trying to solve those problems, it doesn't just get down to we have to be high and tight on the curriculum, which we do, but it's not about law and order. It's more about engagement. If that makes sense. So it's more important that the kids are in the classroom, even if sometimes it might look chaotic, but they're staying engaged. They're part of the learning community, and we can bring them along rather than removal. Now that's a kind of a mushy response, but that really is what it boils down to. Managing the classroom doesn't mean just control.
Dr. Ahart, I have a question for you. Speaking about like community partners, how does the district plan to engage our Black males in the area of literacy that could make a direct impact on the data that we see? And what could we do going forward utilizing our community partners to help in making an impact to maybe we would see something different in the future? And has that been considered?
Yeah, so we have, as you all know, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of community partners, and we're working at expanding opportunities. But the thing that I want to highlight the most is I've been working with a local one-woman team in designing an extended day program that is rich in it will have a literacy element to it for sure, but it's not. The intent is for it to not feel like school, but to really lift up, especially Black culture, the arts, and give lots of opportunity for self-expression and engaging with really good literature. And so we're in the planning stages of that now, and I hope to have identify the schools that we'll initially engage with. Started out not at full scale, but started out at a handful of schools, and probably schools that don't currently have an existing program with one of our partners or with 21st Century Learning Communities, and then refine it from there, and then expand it. And one of the things that we're trying to emphasize is engagement with our older students, and paying our students, especially our Black students, to be providing a lot of these services for our students, with the idea that our students really see school as part of this extended day as a place where they want to be, where they get to be themselves, where they get to do things that are meaningful to them and that they find rewarding, and really connecting that with their typical school experience, and at the same time help them build home libraries with really good literature, so that they have opportunities at home to really talk with their families, older siblings, grandparents, parents, etc., about what it is that they're doing in school, that they're really connecting with, and being able to extend it even further that way. So that's one thing that's in the planning stages right now, and then we're also exploring the concept of a academy for students of color. It wouldn't have to be exclusive to students of color, but there's a school in California, Long Beach, actually. I know the superintendent there that just retired, who had some good luck with a program like that. And so I've been having some conversations with him about how we might recreate that in a meaningful way in the Des Moines context, where students have a different anchor to the school experience, and through a number of different levers, start seeing themselves as, picturing themselves in the stages beyond school, and pursuing those things that we know really make a difference, like reading and math, while they are in school. So those are two things that are actively in the planning stages right now, in addition to, continuing to work with our existing partners with programming that's already in place, but not as consistently in place as we might want to see.
What are we doing currently during the school day for our Black males that is different from all students?
Well, the single biggest thing that I can point to is ensuring that all of the data that we look at, from attendance to behavior to academics, is being looked at through the lens of our Black male students, and then and so this looks different building by building, but then determining what are the root causes of those things that are creating the numbers that we don't want to see, those numbers that are discrepant from their all student comparison group or their all gender comparison group, and then working at eradicating those things that have become barriers. So, for instance, what are the numbers of office visits, office referrals for our Black male students as compared to all of our other students? If we're discrepant there, then some adult behavior needs to change. So identifying what the causes of that are, and then intervening in a meaningful way with adult behaviors so that those numbers will no longer be discrepant. There are a few different tools that our teams can use to look at data that helps identify not just building trends, but sometimes classroom by classroom trends, so that certain teachers may have a particular challenge with a particular group of students, and being able to identify that with data and then problem solve with that particular teacher, that particular grade level, to change behavior such that the inequity gets eradicated.
So if I'm understanding correctly, we're doing a root cause analysis building by building and implementing different strategies at each building based on that root cause analysis?
Yeah, that would be a simple way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing that in the response to data or the priority actions. So I would just urge you in the future on these reports to really highlight exactly what the priority steps are and next steps are that are specific to our Black males, so that we have an understanding of really what needs to be monitored moving forward to ensure that if it is a root cause issue or identification issue, and that looks different at each building, then maybe we need to break out the root cause at this building is attendance, the root cause at this building is behavior referrals, and these are the strategies that we're using to make changes in those locations, just so that we can have a really clear picture of the difference between what we're doing to improve literacy scores for all students versus improving literacy scores for our Black male students.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions on this monitoring report? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion and a second to accept the Black male third grade reading monitoring report as providing evidence for compliance with a reasonable interpretation of student expectations policy 4.11.
And Chair, I would also interject and just ask the final question to Dr. Ahart.
Oh, thanks,
what can the board do to help you with the school?
Well, I think it would be helpful to, like for instance, the feedback that we just got. So what we've tried to do are have include in these reports things specific to reading. So if that's not sufficient, that's good to know, because there are a lot of things that we're doing that they're important for reading, but they're not specific to reading. So that would be one thing. Continue to provide feedback on what you would find meaningful in these reports. And then I would also just again urge everyone to understand that the basic process of learning to read is the same for everybody, and so I don't think there's one specific thing that Mr. Barron referenced earlier. Something that works for this group is likely going to help other groups. That's definitely the case. So there's not a special reading program or intervention specific to reading that is particularly more effective with Black males. Really, what we need to be doing is looking at our adult behavior and ensuring that we're providing an environment that our Black male students find welcoming, that they find meaningful. And that means a lot of adult behavior needs to change. And we need to continue to work on cultural proficiency. We need to continue to work at our biases. We need to continue to identify and call out racist elements in the system and break those down, and not let even something that's been a persistent failure point for us be the excuse that, well, it's always been that way. Nobody else has figured it out, so why should we expect any different? We should expect different. And so I guess that I would give a similar response to what I did last time, which is our community needs to understand that school works when we give it a chance. We need to do the right stuff in our classrooms, in our buildings, in the district, but we need to have our kids here to make sure that all that happens. And we're going to continue to provide additional opportunities that we think are more meaningful and engaging for our students. But if we don't have our students here, those efforts are obviously not going to work. So it really does need to be a partnership. And the more we can send that message as a district and as a board, I think the more success we're going to see.
I was just going to say thank you. And, as we always hear, student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sawyer. May I have a motion and a second to accept the Black male third grade reading monitoring report?
So move, Caldwell Johnson.
Second, Barron.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Mr. Barron. Ms. Jenkins, could you please take the vote?
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved, 6-0. The next item on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please email aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to an agenda item. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said decision, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do not.
Ms. Sawyer, I believe you have the consent motion.
I do. Thank you. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $15,985,363.33.
Is there a second?
Caldwell Johnson, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Are there any discussion or questions? Ms. Jenkins, please take the vote.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The consent items are approved, 6-0. The next item on our agenda is E1, public hearing, fiscal year 2021 budget amendment hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1?
We do not.
Okay. Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board approve the budget amendment for the fiscal year 2021 as presented following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item E1?
Cody, move
Caldwell
approval.
Johnson, move approval. Second.
Who was that second? I'm sorry. Okay. So we have a motion by Mr. Cody and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Is there any discussion or questions? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Jenkins, could you please take the vote?
Bradley,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. Next on our agenda, we have items of privilege. Do I have any board members that have any comments to share?
I would just like to say thank you to our board chair, Ms. Bradley. I know that she's been super busy this week, and I want to congratulate her as she's in the middle of Juneteenth and Juneteenth celebrations. So thank you, and continue to appreciate your leadership. So I just wanted to share that with you this evening. And I also want to lift up just our staff. I know that they got done with a hard year. I was talking to a teacher today, and she explained her last day of school, which is very abnormal compared to normal years, or I would say, if you want to call it normal years, but usual years where we're not in the middle of a pandemic, and just how she felt physically and emotionally at the end of this year. So thank you to all of our staff, and I hope you're getting much needed rest. And to our staff that are engaging in summer school with our students, I appreciate your efforts to share your talents and your time this summer with our students. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I did have a
Yes.
quick question.
Yes.
It was actually brought up by one of the speakers today, the House file that passed with regard to, I don't even know how to characterize it, but our inability to reflect on what historically has happened to communities of color in this country. And I'd be really interested in doing a bit more intimate discussion about that, what the implications of that are for the district, what that looks like for us moving forward, and how we show up in that space. But more importantly, whether or not there may be some opportunities for us to push back on that, because I don't see that as being consistent with who we are as a district. Being unable to teach history is not consistent with what education is all about. And I just don't believe that we should take this lightly. So,
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell Johnson. And that's something that I will bring up again in agenda planning. I'm sure that the district is already working on some things of how to address that and learning more about that bill. So if there's an interest to hear more about that, I'll be talking to Dr. Ahart and Mr. Barron when we talk, and we will discuss that. I also wanted to thank Ms. Sawyer. I do want to apologize to the board. I'm very preoccupied right now, so I was not really focused in here even this evening, as I am continuing to continue the work of Juneteenth this week. So I have just kind of been in another headspace. So I want to apologize for that, because I have not really been focused this evening. But I would like to invite everyone to come out to our Juneteenth festivities. We will be having a banquet on Thursday. We are actually recognizing one of our own teachers here in DMPS, Mr. Gerald Joseph, who is receiving the Mary McLeod Bethune Educator of the Year Award, and he is retiring too this year from the district. So we're excited to be able to recognize him. And then on Saturday, we will have our Neighbors Day, which will take place downtown at Western Gateway Park from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. So I encourage you all to come out and celebrate Juneteenth with us. And I want to just take a shift from that as well, just to thank everyone for all of the work they've done, from my board colleagues to Dr. Ahart, to staff. We are approaching what I call is the end of our fiscal year June 30th, and we will start brand new July 1st. And I know that this last school year has been rough and it has been tough at times. It has been frustrating. We have felt it all the way from the boardroom, probably all the way down. And I just want to encourage us that as we begin to look at July 1st, that we would look at that as a new beginning for us as a district, a new beginning as a board, a new beginning for staff, as well for this district. We can continue to live in the past, but I hope that we will do our very best to move forward to the future. And so I am committing to do as much as I can to continue to push our board to do its job. Also committing to, having Dr. Ahart a part of our conversations and really pushing us to become a team of 8. I wholeheartedly myself believe in this district and the work that we're doing. I know at times it's going to make us uncomfortable, and I know at times things may not go our way, but the one thing that I continue to say that we all have in common is we want to be able to set up our students for success. We all may have different ways of that happening, but it is something that we wholeheartedly believe in. So I just want to encourage you all, as the end of this fiscal year comes, that we begin a new one, that we will start looking at as new beginnings, and we will do our best to all work together to do what's best for our students. With nothing else, Dr. Ahart, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just give a shout out to all of our families and staff who have committed themselves to our summer learning experiences. We have just come through perhaps the most challenging year in public education. There's some great opportunities this summer to make up for some of the interrupted learning. And I'm so appreciative of the staff who, after this exhausting year, have agreed to sign on and keep at it for another good bit of the summer to set our students up as effectively as we can for success. And I want to also just recognize that we're providing transportation for well over 400 students for summer programming in this first term. And with COVID challenges in hiring for transportation, my hat goes off to LaShawn Mosley and her team in transportation for making sure that that gets done. And all of our students genuinely have access to our extended programming this summer, and to the flexibility of our construction and facilities team for working around the multiple sites that we have, providing student programming this summer, and for our food service team for providing breakfast, lunch, and snacks essentially all through the summer as well. So while the fiscal year is wrapping up, the work of the district is going hot and heavy. And there's lots that needs to happen to make sure our students are set up for success in August, and that facilities and staff are well rested, clean, and ready to get back at it as we approach the end of August. So thank you to the entire DMPS team.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. I thank you all for joining us this evening for our school board meeting. This meeting is adjourned at 7:46 p.m. We will start in about 5 minutes for our work session on our SMART goals.